Welcome everybody to the Matrix Educational Webinar Series. You should be on mute, so we'll keep you on mute until the end, and then we'll ask questions. So kind of hold those questions until the end, and we're going to go ahead and record this. So just so you know, you are being recorded, and that's just a privacy statement we need to make. So this is episode 20. We're going to talk about what's new in Sage 100 for version 2021 through 2023. And we've kind of broken this up into categories. So Dave, do you want to show those categories for us? So we kind of looked at the list of stuff, and we broke it down into a baker's dozen. So kind of keeping it light for us today. And we broke it up into 5 categories altogether. Some new utilities that are useful, some functionality that has been enhanced, step savers, so things that are making life easier, and there's a couple great ones in there. Some new settings that you may want to take advantage of, and then there's a set of modules that have been upgraded with the 2022 and 2023 version that we'll highlight. So as far as utilities go, we know that some people know this, that you can do a task scheduler within a Windows environment to fire off jobs. Probably the most common one is I want to do a VI export out of data, and the task scheduler, you used to be able to do this within the Windows task scheduler. You needed to know some particular code and ways to launch that, but Sage has put that inside of the user interface and allows you to create those for different modules. And we'll talk about a couple of examples that Dave's thought of. So Dave, you want to kind of give some real life examples of that?
Yeah, sure. So Task Scheduler has actually been in the Sage interface for a couple versions, but they've been enhancing it. And so when it first got introduced, it was limited to, like Jeremy said, visual integrator exports or imports. So if you use the visual integrator tool to import or export data out of Sage, which a lot of our customers do, that was kind of part of the original design. But what they've done over the last several versions is enhanced it to now give you the capability to run reports and to update journals and registers inside of Sage, and really run other utilities inside of the Sage interface. And so we've got customers, obviously, that use it to automate the visual integrator process. So importing, journal entries or, invoices at the end of the day, that type of thing. But got a customer that recently implemented it to update their sales journal process at the end of the day. So they actually have like 3 or 4 point of sale terminals. They have a walk-in counter. They have 3 or 4 point of sale terminals. At the end of the day, they had one person that would update, for all other users. They implemented the task scheduler functionality to just, at the end of the day, they log out, and then it picks up all the sales journals across all those users and updates them automatically. So that would be, one good use. We weren't able to do that, inside of Sage before they added that task scheduler capability. You can also use it to run reports. So we've got a customer that at the end of every day, they wanted to reconcile their purchases clearing. And as many of you may or may not know, and we're going to talk about this a little further on in the presentation, but we didn't have the ability to run purchases clearing with a cutoff date. And so they wanted to run that report at the end of every day so that they could reconcile it, but they didn't want to wait until all users were gone for the day. And so we just implemented Task Scheduler to run that report, and you can actually run the report out to PDF. And so the report runs at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, prints the report to PDF rather than to paper. And now, they've kind of saved that process and automated it. So those are a couple examples I can think of.
Yeah, great examples. VI is definitely the one that I've hit the most with customers importing orders from a website or, some outside source. That's a great example. So the next one is check run reversal. And this one is near and dear to my heart because I was just working with somebody that had done a check run of 80 checks and the checks didn't print correctly. And so instead of having to in the newer version, in this utility, you can take one check register and reverse the entire run, versus in the past it's been going to manual check entry and reversing each individual check one by one. So we're going to show you this interface, but it's a really great utility to when that printer jams and maybe you inadvertently post that batch before you really look at the checks to see if they're all good. So it's another good example. I don't know if you run into that at all, Dave, but it's a great
well,
utility.
so I would share with you that we just had this happen at Matrix. We use Sage 100, and we got a new printer, and our checks on the old printer had to be reverse collated, and the new printer fed them the other way. And so, fortunately for us, it wasn't a large check run, but we had a check run that went out, and the collation on the new printer swapped it around, so they were printed in reverse order. So wrong check number assigned to the wrong check, and this utility is great because, like Jeremy said, if you've got a large check run that you have to reverse, it's now a one-step process rather than having to reverse every single check. So
yeah, exactly. So you want to show a couple of those interfaces, Dave? And
yeah. So let me show you where those are at in the interface. So this is version 2023. The task scheduler is in the library master module on the main menu. So you see it here, task scheduler, and I'll take you in and just kind of show you how this sets up. I set up a sample job. This is our daily sales journal update example I was talking about. So we name the job. We name the company. What company do we want to run it out of? We have to assign the Sage 100 user login. So the Sage 100 user needs permissions to run the task inside the Sage interface. So you'd want that to be like an administrative user, a power user. It does need a Windows user login as well, because you don't have to leave the interface up and running, right? You can close Sage at the end of the day as long as this has been scheduled, the task will run, which means you do need a Windows user login to run that with a password. The workstation name that we're going to run it from, this is our demo server. And then this is where you set the scheduling information. I want it to be daily, weekly, monthly, a one-time job, every number of days down here, a start and end date with a time that you want it to run. And then over on the tasks tab is where you set what you want to run. And you'll notice you can have multiple tasks. So you can, within Sage, run under this job. So you can create one job that spawns multiple tasks inside of Sage, or you can have a single job spawn a single task, either way. So here we're picking the module. We're picking the update that we want to have happen within that module, the update date. Do we want all batches or just a single batch? And then here, I'm picking my printer. So what printer, the sales journal in this example prints to a physical printer. What printer do we want to print to? If that journal has been set up through the paperless office system, I know, a lot of our customers are using paperless office to PDF their journal register updates, then it'll automatically go to PDF. So that's just a real simple job. Show you how we would set up a new one. Just give it a description, because I just want to point out, when we go over to the type, this is then where you define what type of task you're going to execute inside of Sage. So mine was set up as a journal register. We can set it up to run a report, a visual integrator, and then if we select visual integrator, you'd see all the visual integrator import, export jobs. And then other are some system utilities like rebuilding sort files, some more maintenance stuff. They've actually added a utility now to purge inactive vendors and inactive customers. So if you're in the habit of having to kind of run that task manually through the interface, you can automate that. So really what they're doing is, over time, they're going to add more functionality to this, but it's a really nice tool for automating a lot of the things that you're doing manually now in the system. So that's task scheduler. Let me bounce out of here. And then I want to show you the accounts payable check run reversal. That's in the accounts payable module on the utilities menu. And it's this option down here at the bottom, reverse check run. So if we select that, what's nice about this is you can select to reverse, if you know the bank code that the checks were run on and the one of the check numbers. You can select it by bank code and check number, or if you know the register number, you can select it by register number as well. Either way gets you to the same answer. I happen to know that I'm going to reverse a check run that was drawn on bank code D. And if I go to the lookup, here's the list of all those checks that were run on bank code D. Now, these are across different batches potentially, but I'm going to just select check 15 because I know that's part of the batch I ran yesterday. And you can see it automatically brings all the checks into this preview window that were part of either that batch or that check run. So it's going to reverse everything that you see here. It'll tell me that 2 checks will be reversed. It's like any other standard Sage process. So what I would do is I just click proceed. It is going to give me then a posting date option, and then it'll give me a journal register, just like any other process. Now, you can't manually change anything in here. It's just going to reverse everything. What it will do, though, is it will recall all the original invoices. So the normal process of voiding a check, if you're familiar with that, the system offers you the option to reverse and recall the original invoices. It will do that. So once that journal gets previewed, it'll give you the posting totals, and then it'll offer me the update process here. So that's how, and then it'll ask me if I want to reverse the check register. That will actually post it, and now you've reversed that entire batch of checks.
Got it. And so, I ran into a customer that had didn't run checks, ran electronic payments. The same process for electronic payments is included in that reversal. You do have to be a little bit careful when you're doing that generate ACH file, because if you run it and you already ran it and then you run it again on the same day, you could have an ACH file that includes both runs. So you kind of want to be careful when you're doing electronic payments, but the process does work for electronic payments.
Yeah, and so you want to just look at that preview window that I had up, and it'll show you all those transactions that are going to be captured in that reversal.
You got it.
All right.
So let's move on to functionality. So one function that we really have found positive through our client base is multiple sales orders and multiple purchase orders on invoice data entry and receipt of goods entry. So what that means is you can have 2 sales orders or 2 purchase orders. And when you do that entry, we'll take example of invoice data entry. We can apply multiple sales orders to one invoice. So it used to be a 1-to-1 relationship, only 1 sales order to 1 invoice. Now you can actually do multiple sales orders. I don't know that there's a limit. I'm not sure if I've heard a limit, Dave, but I mean, we've done as many as 10 and in an example that I did the other day. So it's
and in the customer you're referring to, I think it was a big win for them, because what they really wanted to do was almost generate a monthly invoice to their customer, right? So they would have orders come in all month, and at the end of the month, they'd want to invoice those individual orders, but then really present a single invoice to the customer. Well, we've had customers request that, and we had to do it through kind of like a statement, right? Because they're invoicing these separate, somehow aggregate them. This functionality allows us to just at the end of the month pick all the orders for a single customer, and it'll put them on a single invoice, and then customers just presented with a single invoice, and it gets paid as a single invoice. So really nice functionality. I think it's more applicable on the sales order side based on what we've seen, Jeremy. It is available on the PO side for receipt of goods and receipt of invoice. So if you have vendors that ship multiple POs on the same pack list, you can now aggregate. There are some rules around that. And, logical things like the ship on a sales order, the ship to needs to be the same, the FOB or the ship via needs to be the same. So logical things that, would indicate these actually should be invoiced together. Those are kind of the rules that determine which ones for an individual customer you can aggregate.
Yeah, so next one was using the current cost or the original cost when issuing a credit memo. I think you've had some experience with this, Dave, but go ahead,
Yeah,
John.
yeah. In previous versions, when you issued a credit memo through the sales order module, you would always apply it to an invoice, a previously posted invoice, and then it would literally just bring up a blank lines tab, and you had to pick the items that you were returning, and then it would always put them back into inventory at the then current cost of inventory. So like the then current average cost. So really what this functionality does is when you reference the invoice that you want to apply the credit memo to, it'll prompt you to recall the line items from invoice history so that you actually see what was on that original invoice. You can enter in by line item what you want to return, but it also then prompts you at what cost do you want to return those items into inventory at? And one of the options is the original cost on the invoice. So, if it was sold 2 months ago and, it was a FIFO item and it came out at a certain FIFO tier cost, it will put it back in at that cost. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but we had some customers with fluctuating costs and they never really were happy with kind of how the return process worked or the credit memo process worked so for them, it's kind of a big one. And
Got it. So one of our clients that was working on a lot of quotes and purging quotes out for is on this meeting. So this one will kind of come close to home. So this is under customer and inventory inquiry. There's an orders tab that you can see all the related sales orders that were under that customer or underneath that inventory item. But that window did not show quotes. So that is some new functionality that's in the system now. Is underneath that orders tab, you can now see quotes that are related to that customer and or inventory item. So it was kind of interesting that quotes got eliminated from that inquiry screen for whatever reason.
yeah, now they've, like you said, they've added it over into inventory so that now you get some visibility into like potential future demand, even though a quote is obviously, you don't know if that's going to turn into an order, but you can at least get some feel as to how often that item has quoted.
Yeah, and it certainly helps cleaning up those quotes so you kind of get that better looking picture. So get rid of expired quotes, and there's a great purge utility that make that happen. So last functionality is iShip was a partner with Sage for a long time, and their product got sunsetted. So what iShip did was you could put a tracking number on an order, and you could use that tracking number to, if a customer called in, you could pull up that order and you could click on a button and it would open up iShip and go out and put that tracking number in the website and show you what's happening with that package. And that's been replaced. Dave, what's it been replaced by?
Well, a combination of things. So they've kind of programmed into the interface direct access into like UPS, USPS, FedEx, DHL, I think are kind of like native. And so, like Jeremy said, iShip used to handle that, and iShip basically just, not sure exactly what happened. It just shut down one day, which means if you use this functionality inside of the Sage interface, it just stopped working. And so they had to, reprogram that functionality so that you've now got visibility of tracking on the major carriers. I'm not 100%. We need to dig in on this. I'm not 100. They claim they can track almost any carrier through Google. I'm not sure exactly how that functionality works, but it handles the major carriers that a lot of our customers ship with, and then some extended functionality through Google. So we can take you in and kind of show you a few of these things back into our Sage system. So the ability to apply multiple invoices or multiple sales orders to a single invoice, I'm sorry. That's going to happen in sales order invoice data entry. So when we're creating an invoice, normal process of just initiating the invoice number and then selecting the order, one of the order numbers that you want to invoice. So I'm going to select this order 182. So that's just one of the invoices for this customer that I want to aggregate, or one of the orders that I want to aggregate on this invoice. So select one of the orders, and what you're going to see is this little plus button here. So this is how we would apply multiple sales orders. So once you've selected the first sales order, we can click on the plus, and then it's going to bring up this selection box, and it's going to offer all of the sales orders for this customer that can be added to this single invoice. And like I said, there are some rules around this. The ship tos have to match, the ship fees have to match. There are some rules if you're using CRM that have to match. So if you're using job cost, the job number that the sales order is linked to has to match. So there's definitely some rules around which ones will appear in this window. Over on the purchase order side, you can't have one PO that you're receiving at your warehouse applied to a receipt that's a drop ship, right? That wouldn't make any sense. And so those kinds of rules, if you get into this window, a couple times I've had to say, well, where is that sales order? Why can't I pick it? Well, it's because something is not matching that would allow us to do it, but it's pretty simple stuff. So here we would just get a full listing of all the sales orders. To add them, we pick the apply button, and then ship complete is the kind of the standard ship complete prompt that you get when you go to the lines tab when you're invoicing a sales order. So do we want the system to default in the full quantity? So we select them, we say okay. It'll give us this little message that it's basically going to, combine freight. If you have deposits on sales orders, it's going to combine deposits, and then it brings all the line items onto the invoice. And then what's nice about it is when I go to the lines tab, I've drug this field up from my secondary entry grid, but you're able to see here in the primary entry grid, you're able to see the sales order that line item came from, right? Got applied from, and then we could print that on the invoice. So pretty simple process, and it's going to look the same. Oh, one other thing I'll point out. Now you can see the sales order number in this panel has changed from the first sales order number I selected because I did a multi-order select. Now it says multiple. That tells me there are multiple sales orders that have been combined into this invoice. So pretty simple process. Once you select that first sales order, it's going to look identical over in purchase order. So if I go into receipt of goods entry and initiate a receipt, and I select that first purchase order, you're going to have this little plus button again. I select on that, and it's going to show me then the orders that can be aggregated. So you're just picking and choosing which ones you want to combine. So that's how the multi-order process works.
Yeah, one thing I would add to that is when you out of the standard forms, when you look at the sales or the invoice form that comes out, it does group the line items by order, and it kind of shows these items came from order number 10 and these orders came from order number 11. So there is some distinction on the printout unless you have a custom form anyways.
So actually that prints on the standard form now, you're saying, on the
Correct.
template. Okay, cool. I didn't know that they had added that. So good to know. Okay, so the original or current cost when issuing a credit memo, if we go into sales order, this is where we would create a credit memo if you're not using RMA. That's done through invoice data entry, and we create an invoice number and we change our invoice type to credit memo. We select our customer, and then we've always had this apply to invoice box here. So we pick the invoice that we want to apply the credit memo to. Okay, so this is kind of where it starts to get new is previously what would happen is this. I'll go back through this process, but do you want to copy the invoice from invoice information from history? If I say no, then I go over to lines and I just have to enter in what I'm returning. But if I say yes, then you're going to get this second prompt, and it's going to ask the question, do we want to recall the item cost from history? So if I say yes, that's going to pull the historical inventory cost that was assigned to that invoice. And that's what it's going to go back into inventory at. If I say no, then it's going to use the current cost, which is kind of always how it worked previously. And then details is kind of cool. That actually allows you to see the current cost compared to the historical cost. So I can see both line items that are on this particular return. And then I'm able to see, okay, this was the cost that it was invoiced out at. This is the current inventory cost. Help me make my decision then how I want to answer this. So I'll go ahead and say yes. And if I go over to the lines, I've got the line items here that I'm returning. Now, what you don't really see is the cost after that point. You'd need to update the credit memo, and it would just put those items back into inventory at that cost. So pretty simple process. Once you reference that apply to invoice on the header, system kind of does everything from there. So that's how that works. I want to show you the quote visibility in customer and inventory inquiry. So if I go into customer inquiry, and this is pretty simple, but I'll just show you how this works. I'm going to go ahead and select my customer. And if I go over to the sales order tab, and you can see it right here, now I can see quotes, and quotes are included in this number. In old versions, that quote just didn't show up, right? You do have some control over it. If you don't want to see quotes in this total, you can click on these binoculars right here, and you can see by default, I'm looking at all order types for this customer. So I could say, well, all I really want to see are standard orders and back orders. I want to eliminate quotes. And now you can see that list is filtered down, that total changes and the quote no longer shows up. So that's going to happen automatically. The binoculars give you the capability to filter those out. Same thing's then happening over in inventory. If I go into item inquiry, and I select an item. Over on the orders tab, this is where we've always given you the ability to see open purchase orders and open sales orders for this item. If I go to the sales order tab, then I don't have visibility of quotes. This little button here now allows me to say, well, rather than just see standard orders, back orders, I'd like to also see how quotes impact current availability for that item. I click OK, and there's my quote there. So now I can see all the instances where this item appears on a current quote, and then they've kind of aggregated it in its own bucket down here. So you can see the total of that item that has been quoted. They don't increment any of the orders shipped because that's like true demand on the item, but they've got to put it out in its own bucket. So
so Dave, do you know when you clicked on the binoculars and added, kind of remove quotes from the list underneath the customer, did that setting stay intact when you went to the item level?
Yeah, that.
Got it. So it's persistent on what you did last.
Actually, let me back that up. In customer inquiry, by default, that just comes up all. Like if I go back into customer inquiry and I go over to SOs, you're going to see there's the quote. So it'll always be set to show all order types, and then you're left clicking on these binoculars here to make the change. So I wouldn't be surprised if they make that a setup option at some point. It would be a little bit nicer to, determine how that comes up by default, but you've always got the binoculars here if you need to change that display.
Got it.
Okay. And then the last thing is the iShip. I can't really demo this because I don't have tracking information inside our system, but for those of you that are familiar with tracking and how it worked, I'm going to find, let me pull up the same customer. If I look at our ABF customer and I go to their invoices tab and I select this invoice, the tracking button has always been here. And if you're familiar with it, if you're not, this is where it appears. So if you're capturing tracking information, or a lot of customers that are using like Starship or some kind of other shipping integration, if you're capturing tracking information inside of Sage, the tracking button is always shown up in the invoice and gives us the ability to click on that I just manually put that tracking number in just so I could show you this, but brings up this screen with all the packages that are part of that invoice. There's our tracking number. And then this is the button that would execute the search, right? The tracking. That used to link to iShip. It now links to, the carriers. And so that button works the same way. It's just been replaced with a little bit different tracking mechanism in 2023. So that's tracking. Take you back into.
So we're on the step savers. So the first one that's been built into the settings now is the detailed transaction registers. As we all know, when we update a register, whether it be an invoice, data entry register in AP or AR or SO, we update the sales journal, and then we update the detailed transaction register. So that has been an option now inside of security to do that automatically.
And one thing on that, it's always been a kind of a question. Why do we have to update the sales journal? And then in a second step, get asked the question, do we want to update the daily transaction register, which is simply the posting to the general ledger module, right? So it's like, and you can't change it. You have to just update it. And so it's like, why is that a two-step process? Well, there were some good reasons, and there have been some good reasons to do it in 2 steps. We've got some customers where the controller, especially when we're initially implementing a system, they want to update it because they want to see all the GL postings and make sure the system's been set up correctly, those kinds of things. So there have been some reasons to separate the tasks, but we're happy that they now have incorporated that process so that you can set it up. And it is, like Jeremy said, it is a security option inside of role maintenance. You have to turn that on by role to determine who has that ability. And it's not really even then something they're having to execute. If their role has been set up to allow for automatic update of the daily transaction register, then after they update their detailed posting register, their sales journal, as an example, or their invoice register, it automatically just prints and updates the daily transaction register all as part of the same process. So that's a real nice step saver for sure, one that we've been after for a long time.
So next one is paperless office, and I think it's fair to say the first one, DTR, if you're using paperless office, that DTR is saved out to the server in that automatic update, and we're capturing that. And then paperless office as a whole has also added the ability to email salespeople. So we talked briefly about this yesterday. What's the impact there? What's the real use?
I mean, we've had customers that they would like every time an order is entered, they have a salespeople, or maybe their entire sales team wants a copy of that customer's order. So if you have an internal sales staff that's entering orders, customers are calling and placing orders, the outside salesperson would like to see those orders. Is probably just the easiest example of that. Well, in previous versions, we had to go in and somehow set up the salesperson's email on the customer record, right? Which is a lot of maintenance. If the salesperson changes, they've now given us the ability to an paperless office enable a salesperson. So when you set up a salesperson record, you can say, hey, this is a salesperson that would like to receive orders and or invoices for their customers. So now if the salesperson's been assigned to the customer order, when you execute that, when you send the paperless office order to the customer, a copy of that order will also go to the salesperson automatically. So the management of that process is a lot simpler because it's done at the salesperson level rather than trying to manage it at the customer level.
Yeah, and as we know, all salespeople are tracking their internal sales in a spreadsheet so they can back it up against their payroll. So it kind of cuts down those questions and copies being sent. So I think the other thing, I don't have any personal experience with this, but I believe that works with split sales reps as well, not just the primary.
Good point. There is a way to indicate whether, if you've got a split or you've got like a manager override, which Sage can handle as well. If you've got additional salespeople that are effectively linked to that commission record, that it would get sent to those additional salespeople as well.
So purchases and clearing is near and dear to everybody's heart that's doing inventory. So the date sensitive report helps in that audit. Can you explain why that's helping? What's the real impact there?
Yeah, we should have an entire session on purchases clearing. It's probably one of the most
Yeah, no doubt.
It's one of the things we help customers with, all the time, purchases clearing. And really, what is purchases clearing? How does it get reconciled? And what, with previous versions, we had no, easiest way to say it is previous versions had no purchases clearing cutoff. So the purchases clearing report that you would print, which is used to reconcile, what actually is still open in the purchase order module in terms of, items been received but not invoiced, or invoiced and not received, or maybe you have different quantities, right? We received 100 of these, but we've only been invoiced for 50 of them. Well, that stays in the purchases clearing account, or the many of you call it the unvouchered accounts payable account, until that purchase order is reconciled. Well, we had no way to print that report for reconciliation purposes with a cutoff date. So like, an accounts receivable, accounts payable, you can print those with cutoffs, and they should then tie to your general ledger account. With purchases clearing, it just was always ran as of today, or whenever you ran it, that was the date you got the report. So it made the reconciliation of the account at month end very difficult. So what they've done now is they've given us the ability to run the purchases clearing report with a cutoff date, so that now you can effectively, or more easily, there were ways to do it, but more easily reconcile that general ledger account at month end.
It's a barrier, there's no doubt about that. So this kind of relates back to the security event that you have up in automatic DTR update, but the user inquiry within security now allows you to do a reverse lookup of security by role. Can you explain how that works, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, in the old versions, you set up users and you set up roles, and then users get assigned to roles. But then it was very difficult. They had reports, but you had to print these lengthy reports out to determine like who actually has access to user maintenance, like who can go in and create users, or who actually has access to general ledger account maintenance. It was just difficult because you did set them up, but there was no way to inquire in by task, by user, by role, like who has access to all these different tasks inside of Sage. So I'm going to kind of show you how that works. They've really simplified it. So if there's ever a question of like who in our organization could get to what tasks in the Sage interface, which is an important question to ask, right? The security gets set up on the front end. Is it ever kind of managed or maintained as we onboard new users and other users leave the organization? Like, are we keeping up on the security inside of Sage? And so it's good to review that. This gives us a much, I think, simpler way to make that determination. So I can actually show you how that sets up. I'm going to jump back into our system real quick. I'm just going to go down. How are we doing on time? We okay? Yeah. I want to just show you on I won't show you all of these, but on the purchases clearing, they've just added that in the purchase order module. So we've always had the purchases clearing report and the purchases clearing in open PO format. This is your purchases clearing with a cutoff date. So now we have the ability to run, and they're basically using the PO history. This is one other thing I should mention is I forget what version it got added, but we now have purchase order history. I think that got added back in 18 or 19 or something like that. It's been a number of versions ago, but you have to be maintaining purchase order history for this option to work. So we would need to turn that function on in purchase order setup options so that you've got PO history. If that's turned on, then you can now run this purchases clearing from history report. And pretty simple, here's where we would enter our cutoff date. So we would exclude transactions after, month end. It's now, November 3rd, we're trying to reconcile our October purchases clearing. We would just run that with a 1031 cutoff date, and it would exclude all the transactions after that cutoff date. The security then, the security is all set up in Library Master. One thing they did do too is, this is 2023, I think, or is it 2022? Doesn't matter. Within the last two versions, don't recall which version they did it, but security is now on its own menu. In previous versions, it was all on the main menu. It's now got its own menu, but the inquiry function that we were talking about is here under role user inquiry. So now you have the ability to kind of look by role or by user or by task or by security option, which is actually another option within security, but we'll just look at these three. Who has access to what? So as an example, if I wanted to look at who in our system has access to Library Master, user maintenance, where users get set up, who actually has that, I can just say, okay, I want to view it by task. I pick my module and I pick the task. And it's going to show me the admin role has access. And then I can drill down on it and it'll say, okay, well, MTX, this is my user account. I'm logged in as MTX. This is the user then that has access to it for all companies. So in this system, I'm the only user that has access to this, different from something like accounts payable. If I go into accounts payable and I want to see who has the ability to maintain vendors, create new vendors, maintain existing vendors, I select my task. I go to vendor maintenance. Well, now I can see administrative role has access to it. Well, who's part of administrative? Oh, well, that's the MTX user. That's me. The AP role has access to it. Well, who's part of the AP role? Oh, Dave, he's our accounts payable person. He has access to that role as well. And so really the ability to pick a task, determine then quickly what roles have access to it, and then take it one step further, what users are actually part of that role. You can also look at it by role. So I could say, well, I want to look at this by role. Here are the roles that I have set up. I've got an admin role, an accounts payable role, a shipping role. Well, who actually has access to shipping? Oh, well, it's Tom. Tom's our shipping person. That makes sense. Well, what actually does he have access to? He has access to, across all companies, the sales order module, the shipping menu, and these are all the tasks within that menu that he has access to. So a pretty quick way to, by task, by user, by role, drill into like who can do what in our system.
Yeah, that's definitely nice because it can get muddy really fast.
It gets muddy, yeah, because we have some customers that have very granular. I mean, you see kind of all modes of setup, but we have some customers that have very granular security setup, right? They have a shipping role, an accounts payable role, an invoice data entry role, a lot of roles. And so over time, like you said, Jeremy, it gets fairly muddy.
Yeah, it gets spaghetti. Very cool. So let's go onto the category settings. So we talked about this similarly earlier with the quotes, and Dave made a comment that maybe in a future release a setting will come out, but a new setting has been put in for inventory transactions, and now you can have when you go to an inventory item and you go to the transactions tab, it used to show transactions, I believe, Dave, for the current period that you're in.
Yeah.
And now you can set a date range so that you're looking at a wider swath versus just the current period.
And the issue on that, Jeremy, was always if you're behind in closing your period ends, which is not uncommon, right? Yeah. So we're in October, we still haven't run period end process for August. So that is the current inventory period. So what we would do is we would always display the current inventory period, which was 2 months ago. And then the
Yeah.
user had to click on the binoculars to expand the transaction dates that they could see. August is 2 months ago. I want to see October. And so now this setting is really, and I'll show you what the options are, but it's giving us better visibility so that the user doesn't have to go in and click on those binoculars every time to see the transactions that they want to see.
And kind of in a similar mode, when you look at an item list, the option to eliminate inactive items from that ALE, which stands for Advanced Lookup Engine, is now a new option. So when you have an inventory that you're maintaining and keeping active and inactive items, they used to always show the inactives in the list, even though we're not selling them anymore. Now we can make that a permanent exclusion from that list.
Yeah, the way we used to handle that was you had to write like a filter, right? So you had to build a custom lookup and then set a filter to exclude the inactives. And so now this is actually in company maintenance. There's an option in company maintenance where you can exclude inactive customers, inactive vendors. They've added it to that same place, exclude inactive inventory items. So as you're inactivating items, they just no longer show up. You can still see them if you need to get back to them, but we're excluding them from the ALE primarily. So let me just show you real quick. I want to just show you where this default date range for the inventory transaction view appears. Minimize that. Okay. So we're going into inventory, inquiry, or item maintenance, either place. And what we're talking about is when we would look at inventory inquiry, we would go over to the transactions tab. And what we would see, and that's what you're seeing in this system, is you're seeing just the current period. So this system actually, this is our demo system. It's actually in May of 2025. So, well, we're actually in October of 2025. What the user would do is click on these little binoculars right here, and then they could expand out the range of transaction dates. And now we're seeing transactions back into 2024. All the way through May of 2025. So this little button allowed you to get to what you wanted to see based on what current period you were in, but was a little extra work. What they've done now is in inventory management options, over on the additionals tab, we've got this setup option. So transaction date search, the default selection is, and here are your options. So we can look at the current calendar year. Now this is still using the calendar year that's the inventory module is in, right? It's not looking at the computer's date, but we can look at the current calendar year. So the entire year, 7 days or newer, 30 days or newer, 60 days or newer, all the way down to 365 days or newer. So these are nice options because those are actually looking at the computer date and filtering. So if you set it at 60 days, now it doesn't matter what period your inventory module is in. It's going to look at the computer date and it's going to filter based on what the current date is going back these number of days. So as an example, since my demo date is in 2025, none of these options are going to work for me all that well. But if I just set that to current calendar year, now when I go back into item inquiry and I pull up that item and go over to transactions, now I'm looking at the entire calendar year, 2025, January, all the way down through May. All right. Let's see here. Now I got to figure out how to get back to. Okay.
There you go. You're killing it. All right. So last, kind of one of the last categories is module upgrade. So this was kind of a big step that Sage took for manufacturing environments. And what they did was they used to have a module called work order. And now that module is called production management. And they also have operations management. But production management is for the manufacturers that used work order. And that has been replaced and it has some new functionality. And I don't know if you can elaborate on that, Dave, but that module has been updated and kind of carried forward.
Yeah, I would say they've been on, and I noticed Ken's on the call, so I know and you use the work or you've looked at the work order module, I think in the past, the IRP, which we're going to talk about next, would affect you. But the the work order module, they've been in the process of replacing work order with production management. And the work order system, it's been around a long time, but it was, I don't want to say it was difficult to use, but there were a number of steps to actually process a work order. With production management, they've been kind of working on it to bring it up to spec now over a couple versions. It's now really the only option you would have in terms of work order capability in 2023, and it's much simpler to use. So they've really done a nice job of taking the customers that were using the work order module and allowing them to migrate into production management. If you do have manufacturing production management requirements, they do have a migration process. So it's a very different system. I mean, it's not just like a user interface change. It's a complete rewrite of the module. But in terms of transaction processing, it's much simpler from a usability standpoint. So we're real happy that they finally got that into the 2023 version. The second one, you want to comment on that, Jeremy, the IRP, or you want me to?
Yeah, so kind of in the same light, MRP is now IRP. So they've changed the language a little bit, but all said and done, it's kind of looking at inventory and saying, here's what we need to do to hit demand that is coming up in the future, and what we need to order, what we need to produce.
Yeah.
And if you want to, I don't know if you want to elaborate on some of that. UI has really changed, and that's
I would say
friendly.
Yeah, I would say on that, and this, because it's with MRP, same thing. MRP was around a long time. They've been in the process of moving MRP into IRP, much simpler to use. If you're familiar with how, and actually we've got some distributors that use IRP because it can be used for manufacturing work tickets, but it also has the ability to look across demand for, if you're a distributor, look across demand for inventory items, and based on reorder points and demand from sales orders, make a determination of what would be required to purchase. And what's nice about it is it gives the user, whether you're the purchasing person or in the case of manufacturing, the person that issues the work tickets, it gives you a really nice dashboard to kind of give you all the details of, the inventory on hand quantity, the demand from sales orders and back orders, what our reorder points are, and then it time phases it so you can see kind of when those, promise date on the sales orders, and make a determination of what you should be purchasing, and then gives the person the ability to just select which items that they want to purchase for, and it automatically creates the purchase orders. So it really makes the job of the purchaser in a distribution environment or manufacturing environment. Obviously, you're purchasing, materials for your items that you manufacture, or production items that we manufacture in-house. It makes that job of issuing POs and work orders much easier.
Yeah, and just that module alone could be a session on its own. So we're not going to dig into the details on either one of these, but that upgrade has happened to those modules, and like Dave said, there's some better UI and better workflows within those two modules that really help out.
We've kind of been talking about it. Yeah, and we've been talking about it for a while. If you use either one of those modules, work order or MRP, when we get to 2023, when we make the decision to upgrade to 2023, we're going to want to migrate to production management and IRP. I mean, that'll be a requirement. So.
All right, then so that was the baker's dozen, was the upgrade of production management. So I think one other thing that we want to bring up is we've seen some new functionality within Paya credit card processing that is going to be our next session, and we're going to talk about one particular functionality that has come up with clients recently is what's called fee recovery, which is we take a credit card and we get charged 3.5% for taking that card. How do we regain those fees from a customer? And that is now built into Paya as an option. It's an add-on that you can pay monthly for, but they will calculate out that fee recovery on both credit cards and ACH payments to get those fees back for those people that want to use credit cards to gain points and go on vacation. So that's one that has come up, and they've greatly enhanced Click to Pay, which Click to Pay is I send a document out to a customer and there's a link on that document that they can go to and pay just that one invoice. That's been around for some time, but one of the new functionalities is the customer can also now log into a portal securely and see all of their invoices that are open and pay multiples at the same time. And that functionality has been greatly enhanced within the last 6 to 8 months. So it's a session that we'll do here in the near future. So
does that require two things on that, Jeremy? Does that require paperless? So we email out the invoices with a link in it, right?
Well, the portal doesn't require the link. It requires a username and password, and they would need to know the portal location. But to do the easy checkout of Click to Pay, it would be a PDF with a link on the bottom of the PDF.
Okay.
To get to that easy checkout and kind of that one invoice to one payment functionality.
Yeah. Okay.
Good
Thanks.
question.